Hello guys and welcome back. So in the last section we shared the data from the service in the users component as well as the user details component. Okay, but this data is eventually hard coded, right? So we now want to leverage a service to get this data and then use it inside our application. Okay, so to do that, Angular provides us with a module. The name of this module is HttpClient module. Okay, and with this module you can use this module to basically make AJAX calls into your application to fetch data, to post some data, to update the data on the server, and make other REST API calls like get, post, put, delete, options, patch, JSONP, and that's all, I guess. Okay. Now, Angular handles the response that we get from these calls using RxJS observables. Okay, and basically an observable is something that emits responses over time. Okay, so instead of being a one-time event, it can or may not emit data over time. Okay, and this is important, and it's somehow different from promises. If you know about them, they are also a way of handling asynchronous data requests. Okay, so in this section we'll have a look at HTTP client, HTTP headers, and HTTP parameters. So let's first get started with HTTP client module. So to use HTTP client module in our application, the first thing that we'll have to do is we'll have to import the HTTP client module. Okay, and that is something that we'll have to import from Angular/commons/HTTP, like so. Okay, so once we import this module and add it to the imports array so that our app module can use it, in the user service we can now inject HTTP module, or sorry, this would be HTTP client. I'll simply name this as HTTP right now. Okay, the name of this class or this type is HTTP client. So that is something that can again be imported from Angular/commons/HTTP. Okay, now since I have injected this HTTP client as a dependency, I can eventually use it inside my service. Like if I wanted to make any type of call, like a get call, a post call, a put call, a patch call, or anything of that sort, a delete call, I can use this dependency now. Okay, so let's first see what API we are going to leverage for getting the data right here. Okay, so there is a service named JSON placeholder. Okay, it's a free service that returns fake online REST API that can be used for testing and prototyping. Okay, and it has certain routes that you can go to. Okay, so some APIs for getting the user's data is also available. So this is the service that we are going to use. If I click on this, okay, I'll see the data in this format. Okay, so I get a list of users, and each user has fields like ID, name, and email that we also have in our application. Okay, apart from that, it also has some other details that we can eventually use in our application at some point when we want to add on features to it. Okay, now so far this looks good, so I'll just use it. But to use it, let's first copy this data so that we can basically update our interface to add other such fields as well. Okay, so in here I'll just increase the font size right now, and let's just paste this data and format it first, and then I'll simply remove these double quotes from here, like so. And then I'll also get rid of these commas and place semicolons over here. Okay, now I'll just change these to number and all the strings to string. Let's see if we can do that using this, or we may probably do something like this again. Okay, this is perfect. Now this won't be a string, this would be an object. And again, this won't be a string, it would be an object like so. And same is the case with this. Okay, now each and every object that we have here can also be exported or used as an interface. So I'll do the same. So for the address object, I'll create an address interface like so, which contains a geo object, which again can be used as an IGO interface. Okay, so interface IGO and this, and then finally in here I can use the I address interface, and for this company as well I'll cut it from here and I'll create an interface named I company like so. Like so. Right, now we just have the ID, the name and the email of a user. So for all these other fields we should simply mark them as optional. Right now we can mark them as required at some point in time in the application. Okay, but right now we just need the ID, the name and the email of a user. So these would be marked as required, while the others would be marked as required, while the others would be marked as optional, because I've specified the question mark over here. Okay, so let's save this, and now in the user service I'll just use this URL from the JSON placeholder API. Like I'll create a private variable here. I'll name it root URL, which is of type string, and then I can assign this value to it. Okay, now in the get users, instead of returning the users like so here, I'll use the dependency HttpClient that we injected here. So let's do one thing. Let's create a new method, get users by REST or via REST. Okay, and now what this method is expected to return is an observable. We'll see what observables are in a bit, but just bear with me right now. Okay, now this observable is a generic type, and it takes this. Okay, so we are expected to return an iUser array from this method, so that's what we'll do. Now this should return this dot http dot get. Okay, we are using get here because we are going to make a get request to this API. Okay, so get. Now this dot root URL is something that I'll use for this. Okay, now if you see the signature of get, you'll see that the first argument it requires is a URL, which is a string, and then it has an optional options object that can be passed in as a second argument. To this, this is an object containing other objects like headers, which are again optional, and then headers can either be an instance of HTTP headers, or it can be an object with a key named header with string and a string actually, or an array of strings, and then we have other things as well. Okay, right now we are not really concerned about these options as of now, so we'll just ignore them. We'll just use the URL here. Okay, so now the get again is going to return an observable but of type object. Okay, but in the return type of this method we have specified an observable of type IUserArray. So get can also accept a generic type, and we'll specify the generic type as IUserArray, and now this won't give me any error. Okay, so if I save this now, and I had to inject observable from RxJS/observables to make this work, so that is something that must be kept in mind. Okay, now in the users component, I'll just comment this line out, and I'll use this dot user service dot get users via REST. Okay, and this method here is going to return an observable to me. Okay, to get data from this observable, I'll use the subscribe method on it, and then to the subscribe method I'll pass a callback function as a first argument. Okay, and this is going to return to me the user's data like so, and then I can simply assign this dot users equal to users like so. Okay, now I'm getting an error because I specified a semicolon there, but that's not really required. If I save this now and reload the application, instead of the 5 users that we were getting initially and the users that were hard coded, we'll see now a list of all these users right here. Okay, but now if I still click on a particular user, I should see the details that were hard coded initially, because I haven't made the same changes in the user details component, but I've simply changed the users list component. So now to make the same changes inside the user details component, okay, I'll also create another method inside the user service. I'll call this get user by ID via REST. Okay, and this again is going to receive a number which is the ID of the user, and instead of an IUser object, it is going to return to me an observable of type IUser. Okay, and I can simply return this dot http dot get, and in this get, now apart from passing the root URL, I'll also pass slash. Maybe slash is no, slash is not there inside here, so I'll just pass slash and the ID that I got from here. Okay, and again, since get is going to return an observable wrapping an object, but I wanted an observable wrapping an IUser instance, I'll do this, specify that type here as a generic type to the get method. Okay, now let's save this, and in the user details component here, I'll just comment this line out, and I'll call the user service dot get user by ID via REST, and I'll pass it the ID of this user, and this again is going to return to me an observable to which I can subscribe using the subscribe method, and this will eventually give me a user that I can simply assign to this dot user like so. Okay, if I save this now, then I should get the actual details of that user. Okay, and not just these details, I can also get some other details like let's print out some other details as well in the user details template right here. Okay, so I'll get things like user name, which would be user.username, and then I'll also get user address, I'll simply use a pre tag here to print out those details. User dot address. This is going to be an object, so I can specify, or I can use a JSON pipe here that will convert this address object into a JSON and then print that out onto the screen. So if I reload, I should see the user's address object as well here. Okay, so that's how we are using the get method here to get the list of users and the details of a particular user. So the API that I used was JSON placeholder, and here I'm using the users API to get a list of all the users, while I can also do something like user/1, press enter, and then I can get just details of one particular user that I'm using inside here in the user details component. Okay, so this is how you can get data from an API and then use it inside your application. Okay, now let's quickly talk about what this subscribe method is. So if you are using some any particular front-end framework, that you might be well aware about what callbacks are and how they can be used in asynchronous programming. And then there were some issues with callbacks, like callback hell, to tackle which we came up with promises. Okay, so promises are basically some things that request for a say some data that is present on a service. Okay, that is exposed via a server API or a REST API, and then to get that deferred data, you have to I mean, while getting that data, the request can either be rejected or resolved. Okay, so there are two possible cases in case of a promise. Let's say if I wanted to do this with a promise, then I'll simply comment this particular section out, and I'll simply call a toPromise method on it. And then to get the data from here, I can call a then method, and then say get the user success callback here that is going to return to me a user. So then I can simply assign this user details to user right here. Params is not assignable to type. Okay, I might have to convert it into or typecast it into an user. Okay, so if I go to the definition of this, then you'll see that it basically has two callbacks passed to it, on fulfilled and on rejected. Okay, in case of on fulfilled, we get the actual value that we were expecting or we requested for, and on rejected we get an error or the reason why that particular request was rejected. Okay, so there are basically two things that can happen here. We can either get an error or we can get the value that we requested for. Okay, but so basically this is just a one-time thing. You request for some data, if it is present it's returned to you, and if it is not present and there is maybe some error that went ahead, then you might get the error in the on rejected callback call. Okay, but that is not the case with an observable. So in case of an observable, since it is considered to be not just a one-time thing but a stream of data that can be expected, the subscribe method has three callbacks to it. Okay, so if I go to the definition of it, you'll see that this has three callbacks. The first one is next, so this gets called every time this observable gets a next value pushed to it, then there is an error. So this gets called whenever this observable results in an error. And finally we have a complete callback that gets called when this observable gets completed. Okay, so when the values end up getting pushed to an observable, it gets completed. Okay, in our case, since we are requesting for just just for data from one API, and that API would simply return to us the data all at once, this next method will get called just once, and right after that the complete callback will get called. Okay, let's just quickly check that as well. So I'll simply subscribe to this one. Okay, and then in here, since I got the params like so, and I called it here, called the subscribe method again. This was the first callback that I called. Okay, the second callback is going to be an error, which I can simply log to the console. Got an error while fetching the user details. Okay, and then I can print that error to the console. And then finally, whenever everything that gets completed here, it gets called with a complete callback, but it doesn't receive any argument like the next and the error callback did. So I can now simply, let's say, alert um, fetch of user details completed. Okay, so in this case, this completed callback will get called and will receive an alert. Okay, let's see that in action quickly. Okay, so fetch for user details completed. So this was called when we eventually got the data from the API. Okay, and this is the data that we got. Okay, so this is basic difference between an observable and a promise. Now in the next section we will basically talk about some other methods that you can use in the HTTP client class that exposes these methods. Okay, so we'll have a look at, right now we just had a look at a get request. We'll also have a look at a post request, a delete request, and a put request. And then we'll also see how we can pass HTTP headers or HTTP parameters to a request using this. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.